This is Econ Solutions, how to write a 25-mark essay, and we're going to be looking specifically at Econ 2 or Unit 2 of the AS level course. Now, if you're looking for a detailed plan of how to structure your analysis, evaluation, application and knowledge, then I'd recommend watching the Econ 1 video, as that goes through very well how to actually structure your essay to do with those key skills of knowledge, application, analysis and evaluation, and it will continue nicely onto this video. So what we're going to be looking at today is firstly question commonalities. So there's 4 key words highlighted here to do with these commonalities between the questions, and they show growth, performance and recovery. Now the growth, performance and recovery are basically asking us, okay, how well is the economy doing? How well is it performing? Okay, and these are the measures that they want you to use in order to show that it's performing well. So its performance may be based upon the aggregate demand components, it may be to do with more supply side measures, or it may be looking at the balance of payments. So I've drawn this diagram to show you the link between all those different things, how we can use this to actually build up our knowledge base and answer any 25-mark question proficiently. So as you can see, if we know and understand the supply side measures, aggregate demand components and balance of payments, then we can quite easily link these to the macroeconomic policy and government objectives. Okay, so if we know again what the government objectives are, then it may be that the AD components affecting that can lead to a better performance or worse performance, recovery, growth, etc., which is that ultimate goal of showing us how well our economy is performing or doing. So if you build it up, we want to know how these components affect macroeconomic policy or our objectives, and how this can eventually affect our growth and performance. So the reason I've put arrows, two-sided arrows here, is because it's not necessarily going to build up in this way. So it's not going to ask, say, about government spending and how that affects our macroeconomic policy, which may affect on growth. They could ask it in that way, but they could quite as easily start with something to do with growth. So for instance, if they ask for a high, why there's such a high growth rate, maybe there's overheating within the economy, and then we have to look at, okay, what's telling us that the economy is overheating. It could be to do with aggregate demand, and then finally we could look at what policy implementation is needed in order to correct any imbalances within this economy. So it can go either way, and you can go from any variable here up and down, but the actual general content of the essay will be the same, and you're just looking on how each thing will be affected, and usually to do with how well our economy is performing or doing. So if we look at the content, I'm just going to show you a few diagrams and then look at how we can use those diagrams within the essay. So if we look at the AD components, consumption is just the purchase of goods and services within the economy. Investment is just when we purchase certain goods, tangible or intangible, to do with these future gains. So we're hoping to gain something from that investment within the future. Okay, and then government spending, this is just spending on consumption or investment by the government, and we're going to look how spending and taxation is something called fiscal policy that the government can implement in order to correct growth rates within the economy. Finally, we can look at exports and imports, okay, to do with the current account. So the current account is basically when it's the amount of goods we purchase from other countries, and also the amount of goods that countries purchase from us, and then it's the amount they purchase from us minus the amount we purchase from those other countries. Now we tend to run what's called a current account deficit, whereby we import more goods than we export, and therefore we get a negative current account balance. So as you can see, it's exports minus imports, so our imports is a negative part of this equation. It's taking away from the aggregate demand and will therefore shift it in the opposite way to an increase in exports. So what happens if these components increase, and how does that affect us in terms of showing this in our essays? Well, consumption, investment, government spending and exports, if they increase, we can see that it shifts our aggregate demand outwards. Okay, this is ceteris paribus, so bearing in mind nothing else is happening within the economy to affect these things, we know that any increase in these will shift AD to AD1, our real national output will increase to RNO1, and then our price level, our inflation, is going to increase. Okay, so within the essays, as soon as you see one of these components increasing, get your diagram down, make sure it's labelled correctly, and then show the shifts, and that can lead nicely into your analysis. Okay, because if you explain that the price level is increasing, so PL1 to PL2, then you can start analysing. So as a result of this, okay, prices will rise, which will discourage spending. Okay, so you can actually start leading into your analysis using those words of as a result or consequently, actually explaining in more detail what's happening. So equally, if those components go up, it shifts out. Well, if those components go down, again the opposite happens. So it shifts, AD will shift to AD1, and then you can use these diagrams within your essay to actually analyse and move on to your evaluation. The next thing on our lowest bar was our supply side measures. So supply side measures are anything that boosts the supply of goods and services that are produced within our economy. So I put some policies here to show what can actually boost the supply of goods and services. So something like education and training, where if we're gaining education, we tend to gain more skills that we can actually become more productive or efficient in the marketplace, and we can fill more job roles. We become more diverse in terms of what jobs we can do, and therefore we tend to produce more within the economy. If productivity increases, this is just saying that for every input we're actually giving more output than previous, and therefore we're producing more goods in the economy or supplying more goods in the economy. And then investment in something such as capital, again we can become more efficient due to machinery within the workplace, and therefore our supply can be boosted. Okay, so there are just 3 examples of how our supply side can actually be boosted within an economy, and this is to show you, okay, how will this affect us once we see this in our question. How can we demonstrate this in a diagram? So if these factors are increasing, okay, the supply is actually increasing or shifting outwards. Okay, so our AS is going from, our aggregate supply is going from AS to AS1, okay, which is going to shift our real national output and reduce our price level. Now, try and steer clear of saying that this has created deflation. It tends to be just a reduction in the inflation rate. So if inflation was 2%, it's now gone down to 1%. So it tends not to be specifically saying that we've got deflation, but just that inflation has decreased. So what happens if these factors actually decrease? Well, there's a shift inward in the supply curve, because these goods have become a lot rarer, so therefore the prices are going to go up, and then our real national output is going to decrease because we're supplying less of those goods and services. So the next thing on our bottom layout was balance of payments. Now I've put this separate to the aggregate demand components because it also includes net investment incomes and net transfers, but it also tends to be a question in its own right. So we often have questions to do with growth or something to do with aggregate demand components, such as government spending, and then as a separate question it tends to be the balance of payments. So the balance of payments is just the idea that we have exports being bought from other countries, our goods are being bought from other countries, and we import goods that we purchase from other countries as well. Okay, and that exports minus imports gives us that current account balance, which often is in deficit. People tend to say that if it's in deficit, it's a bad thing. That's not necessarily the case. It doesn't always say that you're doing poorly as an economy just because you're in deficit. What it may mean is that you're doing well, but you just need to improve your growth by importing certain goods and services as well, and you just have to borrow to sustain that. But as long as you can afford to do that, it's not a problem. So the other thing to include is net investment incomes. So net investment income is just something like dividends or profits from another firm in another country that's UK owned, and we get obviously that as an export in terms of the money, and that can boost the actually output of our economy. Also, net transfers are things like foreign aid and such things as the European Union expenditure that we obviously give a fair chunk of money relative to other countries into the European Union, and therefore we tend to have a deficit of net transfers as well. So as I said, there could be questions specifically to do with balance of payments, and this is one that has been asked in the past, where it asks you again to assess the impact on the performance. So how well is the economy doing as a whole? Okay, and then it just asks what happens if you increase exports or reduce imports. Okay, so there's some things you could be asked. So again, we're building it up again to show that how this actually affects the performance of our economy. So the next thing is our macroeconomic policy, as we can see here, and then government objectives. First thing is fiscal policy, and this involves taxation or government spending, and in turn government borrowing, depending on that spending and taxation. So just a brief note here that Keynesians tend to argue that we can correct the market through this government intervention, particularly with fiscal policy measures, and it allows us to boost growth in periods of a downturn and rebalance the economy. However, monetarists believe that in the long run this tends not to work, and we should use monetary policy for this rebalancing of the economy or to boost growth in the long run. So you have expansionary fiscal policy and contractionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy is just where government spending increases. Okay, this is aimed at boosting the aggregate demand of the economy. So if spending increases, it actually shifts aggregate demand out, and then people tend to have more money to spend in general because of the multiplier effect, and therefore the economy improves, the growth of the economy also improves. The other thing is if taxation decreases. So if taxation decreases, then we tend to have more money in our pockets, so more disposable income that we can consume more, and then again this output or aggregate demand will increase. Contractionary fiscal policy, okay, simply the opposite of expansionary, as you can imagine. So government spending decreases, and if the government spending decreases, then our aggregate demand, may cause a reduction in the interest rates within this. So government spending decreases just means that we have less money probably to spend, and therefore the interest rates may reduce to encourage that spending later on. So there may be a conflicting thing between the monetary policy and the fiscal policy, which again may be an aspect of the essay. So the increase in taxation. If taxes increase, people will be left with less disposable income, so consumption is likely to fall. So again, if taxes increase, okay, that means we're paying more money to the government that we're not seeing, and therefore we're not going to go out and spend as much, and the amount of that difference depends on our propensity to spend. Next thing is monetary policy. So monetary policy has been set independently, and that's by the Bank of England. Okay, and it's independent, so the government has no influence on monetary policy. They do, however, ask for a specific inflation rate, so a target rate of 2%. So they do influence monetary policy slightly, but it's meant to be completely independent of the government. And the Bank of England set the base rate, and this is the base rate that they choose to lend to other banks, hoping that banks will lend to each other at similar rates, and then in turn to the general population. So, expansionary monetary policy is to do with reducing interest rates. So if interest rates are reduced, like they were and still are today, that's aimed at actually encouraging investment within the economy, discouraging saving, and trying to boost growth through spending and that multiplier. The other thing is to increase quantitative easing. So quantitative easing is often said to be just the printing of new money. Now this isn't specifically true, because it's not a case of just going and printing more £10 notes, £20 notes. The Bank of England has strategies in order to inject this money into the economy. So one way is to buy government bonds or assets in order to reduce the yield on that bond, because of the inverse relationship between bond yield and bond prices, and therefore if the bond yield decreases, other banks that have invested in those government bonds, they may choose to go out and lend to more riskier, or in their eyes more riskier people or businesses, which will actually inject more money into the economy and stop them just purchasing masses of these safe assets. So contractionary monetary policy, again, it's just the opposite. So it's where there's an increase in the interest rate. So if there's an interest in the interest rate, they're going to discourage borrowing and discourage spending and encourage saving. So again, this is a way of changing the price of money, essentially. So if you think of a loan, when you get a loan out, you have to pay interest rates back. The higher they are, the less encouraged you are to actually go and purchase that loan. Okay, and then a reduction again in quantitative easing. So this is, again, they're just reducing the quantity of money they're injecting into the economy. So they may just choose to not have any quantitative easing policy. Finally, the government objective. And as we said, the main one they're looking at is probably growth, and particularly how that growth and performance of the economy shows how well we are doing. But if we look at the main objectives, it's just that we want low employment, so you want lots of people in work. You need to make sure that you have low and steady inflation. You don't want prices rising too high, and you don't want to suffer a period of deflation, because people will hold back purchases, and that's not good for the economy. Steady and sustainable economic growth, again, this is the main goal and the most likely thing you're going to be asked about within the 25-mark question. And then a positive or a strong balance of payments position. So I wouldn't say a positive necessarily means that you're doing well as an economy. If you're importing a lot, sometimes that can just show that you have a high propensity to spend on imports, and if that's increasing, then you're actually showing that you're doing well as an economy and you're growing as well. So this just show you where we are, what we've looked at. So we've looked at how the supply side measures actually affect macroeconomic policy, the AD components and the graphs that we can use for that, and then the balance of payments as well. So now we're going to finally look at the growth, performance and recovery. So how well the economy is doing, as we said. And we're going to look at that in context of the essay. So if we look at a question, I think this is from 2013, it says, using the data and your economic knowledge, discuss the difficulties that the government is likely to encounter when attempting to boost the rate of growth of the economy. So this is a really standard question, okay, and it links back again to our three boxes here, okay. So it wants us to look at how the government, okay, is likely to come across difficulties. So those government objectives, okay, are going to be conflicting here, and that's what it wants you to look at. And then our main aim is to boost the rate of growth, okay, but how do we go about that? And if we do that, okay, what AD components are affected, and what other methods could we use? Could we use supply side measures or export-led growth to actually help us within that? So again, it shows you how your knowledge of that table, those three boxes, can really help you gain an understanding of each essay question. So as I've said, we need to put it all together to use our table here to actually implement it into an essay structure. Okay, so here we're talking about growth. Okay, it's looking at a government objective and a macroeconomic policy to do with boosting the rate of growth. And then finally, how is that conflicting to do with different AD components and the objectives? So it all links in, and that's why I had the arrows going both ways. So again, this is shown in Econ 1 video, but it just highlights the idea that the essays are all going to be of the same structure. It's more the content that differs throughout Econ 1 and Econ 2. So we're going to look at knowledge and use our definitions. Okay, we need an intro before that to demonstrate our knowledge, and then definitions as well, which helps with that. And then we need to apply it to the case study, analyze through our diagrams and explaining our diagrams. So as a result, this happens as a consequence. And then finally, the big marks are the evaluation marks. Okay, this is the higher order skill. This is what they're going to be looking for within your essay, and I'll show you how to bulk it up with that evaluation. So I've just created a key here. So the green text I've highlighted tends to be knowledge, blue text application, orange text analysis, and red text evaluation. So this is my introduction to that essay that we saw on the government objectives and the difficulties that they'll experience when trying to boost that rate of growth. So the first thing you should notice is that my knowledge section, which is in green, doesn't have to be my intro. Okay, I personally think that the intro should contain what your essay is going to go on and explain, and if you can show some evaluation from the off, as I've put here, however, which problems and their extent, and I go on to explain the multitude of variables within this essay and within the problems of experiencing growth, then I'm showing a deep understanding, and straight away I've grabbed the attention of the marker. Okay, I've then linked it to the extract, okay, which is show my application, put some analysis in with our keywords of as a result, okay, and then our supply side remedies, just to give again more analysis of a solution that I may look at within this essay. So I would strongly recommend that your introduction shows off all of your skills straight away, and then revert back to the structure, as I'll show you in the next section. So my key tip is to explain what your essay is going to say and just show you appreciate the complexity of the problem. So the question is not going to be a straightforward answer, and that's why you're going to have to evaluate and get the big marks for that evaluation. So the knowledge comes after your introduction. Okay, so we define our terms, and then you can use any diagrams if you can to aid your definition. So you'll see this essay on the Econ Solutions website, which is a model essay that we've written, okay, and it's backed up by diagrams as well, and you can see them there. So here I've just put economic growth as an increase in the capacity of economy to produce goods and services. Now that's a strong definition, and that will pick you up a few marks. However, to really get to make sure you're hitting the 25 marks, you need to make sure you go into depth and again understand the complexity of the problem. So I've gone on to explain that short-term and long-term differences of economic growth and how we need to take that into consideration when discussing the effects of boosting that rate of growth. Okay. So again, even in your knowledge section, you can really show off what you know and explain that you understand the complexity of the question. Here there is a little bit of evaluation, but it's based around the definition, so I've kept it as a knowledge section, but you can still put evaluation throughout, and that shows your deep level of understanding. The next thing is application. Application is quite simply using the extract and referencing that extract, and I think it leads on nicely to your analysis. So here I've referenced the extract on 2 occasions, one on a line specific and one just talking about the extract in general. And this allows you to show that you've read the article, you've understood how it relates to your topic, and you can apply it to your essay, and it leads on nicely onto your evaluation. So you can use, your analysis. So you can use your application to explain what the extract is telling you, and then give some analysis of your diagram, and then lead on to explain your diagram and how that relates to the extract as well. So I'd say application is heavily linked, and make it lead on to your analysis in this way. Okay, and you can pause the video and read this to see where the analysis is taking place. Again, in the same way that you can use your application to lead into your analysis inevitably will lead on to your evaluation, because first you want to explain what's happening, okay, and then you want to explain if it's the only way it can happen or other things that may happen as a result of that. Okay, and these are where your key terms of it depends, however, and then things as well to do with your evaluation really come into play. So again, pause the video, read this and see how I've built it up to talk about the multitude of variables and the different ways that we can be affected by boosting the rate of growth. Okay, so I've just put appreciate the multitude of variables and use these causal chains to allow your essay to flow. So causal chains, I'm just saying link it through that analysis. So as a result, this will happen, consequently this will happen, and then however this may happen. Okay, so if you pause this and you read this structure, you'll see that I've developed that argument in the same way and used again the extract, use some analysis and evaluation. Finally, to really pick up those big marks and ensure you get the 25 marks, you want to go deeper into your evaluation. Okay, this is where you put forward your own ideas, okay, but they have to be justified in order for you to pick up those marks. But you're showing a really deep level of understanding if you can outline the problem and then put forward a possible solution, but you're not proving anything, but you are, if you put forward a solution, you again can understand and show the pros and cons of that as well. So again, pause the video and see how I've developed and gone deeper into the evaluation. Finally, you want to conclude your essay. So I'll just put the questions will always allow you to argue for more than one point of view. Okay, so that's really nice way to help you in order to go on to use that evaluation. Okay, because you know that the way that's maybe expressed in the question is not the only way, or you can actually use the article to see more than one point of view, and they'll often put that in there, and that will give you your howevers, and it depends upon different things. Okay, so like I said, be careful of giving that definite answer. Okay, the point of the 25 marker is that it allows you to think in more deeply about the question and think that it's not necessarily as easy as it may seem. Okay, again, pause this video and just read this context and see how my analysis and evaluation links in to the other. So that's us done in terms of showing actually how the structure of the essay works. So remember, it's just a build-up of content, and then we use that content to apply it into our essay. Okay, so we start off, it will be a question to do with how our growth, performance or recovery is being affected, okay, and you want to know whether macroeconomic policy, government objectives, again, these three at the bottom, how they affect all of these things here. So if you revise each one of these things here, each one of these boxes, you will be able to answer, okay, using the structure of that intro to do with your split of application and analysis, knowledge, etc. And then you can build through the essay the way I have. One more thing is that a few problems that can occur within an essay is that, for instance, this one says the difficulties, okay, to do with the government trying to boost the rate of growth. Now, a common trap that people fall into is that you look at that and you start to go straight in and just start listing difficulty after difficulty after difficulty that the government would face boosting economic growth. Okay, that's a common mistake, and you need to appreciate that yes, there are difficulties, but there are also solutions, and you need to structure it in your way of knowledge, application, analysis, and evaluation. Okay, so don't fall into that trap of just listing what they ask you. It's going to be a pros and cons of both of those things. So this is the Econ 2 video. If there's any other things you want me to include, please leave a comment below and I'll include them. Thank you.